Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I know I had to reschedule this meeting. I'm going to blame Mr. Pelche for calling a staff meeting. If you've been watching the news, you'll hear that as of next Monday, the schools will be open again. Not for you students, but for us to go in. So that's what the bulk of the meeting was about. And we're looking to possibly have students come in small groups as we phase in sort of reopening the building. Not that the rest of the school year won't be online, it is. The rest of the school year is kind of done in the way that it's being doing now, but this is just to get things wrapped up for the year and to start looking ahead to next fall and sort of things, how that's gonna, anyways, I'm not in charge of all that. That's why I had to postpone yesterday's meeting for today. And why it was also pushed to 2:30. So what I want to do right now is do my best to go through a bunch of these graphics examples best I can, just to give you just sort of a snapshot of it. And then after wrapping that up, basically next week and the weeks after, I'll just be doing online classes to support you guys in discussing how to finish up this credit recovery. That's not the right word. To finish up this course, because it's not like your mark is necessarily going to change, but just sort of what are the things, I mean, yes, you could make a final project. That's fantastic if you want to, but I'm not actually requiring that. I'm requiring you to just sort of engage in your learning. And if you're a student who hasn't been engaging to this point, we'll discuss sort of some ways that that can happen, especially if you're planning on taking computer science next year or into the future. So anywho, that's what's coming up in the weeks after this week. Today is all about graphics. If you go to our website, and let me share the screen here, you guys. So if you go to our website, and from our website, if you go to Computer Science 30S, last week in the online class from, oops, that was this week, from the video from last week's online class, which I have open here. The video ended with me just starting about getting started with learning graphics, because a lot of what we did last week was we went over the sort of classes example. So today I'm going to do that. I'm going to go through how to do graphics in general. Graphics was never a core component of this course, which is why there was no assignment that went with it originally. But if you want to learn about graphics, because graphics are really cool, there's a folder full of stuff. There's a presentation. There's videos of me discussing it in slower detail in the past. There's a bunch of examples you can look at. What I'm going to do today is record this very quickly in NetBeans, how to build something using graphics. We've been building off the same example we started this course with. So from intro, methods, arrays, and classes, now we're going to incorporate graphics as the final piece to this. This piece of graphics, this final piece, we've put into a class since we now know about classes. So this class called Learn Graphics, okay, all it does is it builds something called Graphics 1, which is another class that it's building. And that's all we did to set up Graphics 1, which, sorry, just one second. Yeah. Which all it is just a basic class right now. A basic class with a basic constructor. All right, so here's the first thing. Graphics 1 uses inheritance. It extends something called Jframe, which would have to be imported. You have to import Jframe. The Jframe is something that automatically builds graphics for you, okay? It is essentially, for those of you who took the Computer Science 20S course, a form. A frame and a form in this context are interchangeable. Now, if you did this last year in Visual Studio, you didn't have to write code to do that. You could just make this thing. Well, I'm going to show you a way you can do that in NetBeans as well. So although we have a Graphics 1 right here, I'm going to right click on this and add to the package called Computer Science 30S something else that's new. So I right click, new, but instead of going to Java class, which we did for the last unit and this unit, I'm going to find this thing right here called a Jframe Form. This is something that's built right into NetBeans. It's essentially one of these. It's the same thing, same spelling, Jframe. Okay, so I'm going to bring that in, and I'm going to call it Graphics 2. So right-click, New, Jframe Form, calling it Graphics 2. Okay, same spelling as Graphics 1. So capital G, Graphics 2, and I'm going to click Finish, and you're going to see in NetBeans something kind of cool is going to happen. It's going to take a second to add it, and then all of a sudden NetBeans changes, and now it's starting to look a little more like the designer in Visual Studio. You have a palette of buttons and text boxes and stuff. You have a properties window here. Okay, so you have a frame or a form over here that you can use, and you can take controls like buttons and plop on there. We'll do more of that later. But this is essentially that version in NetBeans. Okay. Now, when you did this in Visual Studio, it would open up with the design in one tab and then the code in a second tab. So it doesn't quite do that in NetBeans. The way it does is it opens one tab, but right over here, you have two little buttons. One is for the design of it, which you can see here. And then the other one says source, which is the code. And here you can see when it made Graphics 2, it also extended Jframe. Although it added javix.swing.jframe, it's still Jframe, which means Graphics 2 is essentially exactly like Graphics 1 right now. They're essentially the same code. Then Graphics 2 created a constructor, just like we did. And it calls a method that I don't see because it's actually hidden in some sort of secret code that's blocked away in here. You can open this code up and take a look at it. But the reason it's all shaded is by using the designer, like here, it's kind of hiding that code away from you. So you don't see it. But anyways, just some quick tips on that again, that when you use a designer, you have design and source. But everything I do with the designer, I can do just by writing for it. So this one just has source. Okay. All right. So we're going to do this two different ways. We're going to do it this way using just code, and we're going to do it this way using what NetBeans gave us, this designer sort of feature here. Is there one right or wrong way? No, I'm giving you both options. I'm also now going to go back to learn graphics. And after I made graphics 1, I'm going to now make a graphics 2 the same way. And again, I'm trying to work very quickly today to do this as much code as possible in the time we have here. Okay, so I'm going to make a graphics 1 and then immediately after make a graphics 2. Okay. Now, if I was to run this right now, you won't really even see anything from this. Okay. It will run, it'll say start learning graphics, it'll say completed learning graphics. It will do what you kind of expect it to do, but you won't actually see these forms or these frames appear on the screen. Not yet. Okay. So here you can see start learning graphics, completed learning graphics. It's just like that, right? That's how it's going to work. Okay, it's not the way you would have expected it. And the reason is, by default, when a Jframe is created, it is created essentially invisible. So we're going to change that. I'm going to add a line of code to the constructor that says this. Remember, this is a term we learned, in the classes unit. This means this version of graphics 1 dot, because this is a Jframe, it extended Jframe, all the properties and methods that were built into Jframe are now built into graphics 1. So I just inherited a bunch of methods, including one called set visible to be true. So this is a method that's already built in. I don't have to write it. That makes graphics 1 visible. All right, I'm going to rerun this. Let's see it. slightly differently now, hopefully. NetBeans running a little slow. Okay, starting learning graphics. And there it is. There's graphics one. It's very small. You can't see it, kind of. If I minimize these here, it's up in the corner here. I can stretch it out, and then you can see it. But there is a little form, a little frame. Okay, it had essentially no size to it, but at least it was there, and I could still close it. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is, before I make it visible, I'm going to use another built-in method. This dot set size, and you can see here, set size is a overloaded method. There are two versions of it. And again, hopefully these are concepts you've learned through the course, like overloading. And obviously it's a width. So I'm going to give it a width of, say, 500, height of, say, 400. And now let's run it again and see how graphics 1 looks when I run it this time. And there we go. So now it starts visible at a certain size. Okay. What we did with graphics 1, we can do with graphics 2. Okay. I can go into its source. I can add code to graphics 2. I'm not going to remove this thing because that's used by the designer. But if I just say this dot to be true, run it, I should actually see both of them on the screen. So there, there's a graphics 1 and a graphics 2. I don't know which is which, so, but there they are. Okay, and that's the start. So now let's go back to graphics 1, and we're going to do a couple other things. Let's just start with 1. This dot set title. So this is graphics 1. So it'd be nice to know that. I'm going to set the title to be graphics 1. And with a little bit of copy paste over to graphics 2. Same thing, graphics 2. Rerun them. Okay. And we should have now the ability to see one and then the other. So here's graphics 2. This is graphics 1. Okay. So now I know which is which. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to graphics 1. And before I add any more code to this, I'm going to take these 3 lines and I'm going to put them into a little method I'm going to create for myself. One nice feature that NetBeans offers is I can right-click, go to what's called Refactor. Okay, you can see right there, Refactor. And I can, under Refactor, introduce a method. So I right-click, Refactor, introduce method, or I can simply say Alt-Shift-M. I'm going to show you why this is a neat little option here, that kind of a little power code thing here. So Alt-Shift-M, M for method. I'm going to make a method called set, set this container. You'll see kind of why I call it that in a minute. So by doing that, it automatically created a method called set container. It automatically took the 3 lines of code that I had highlighted and put them in the method. And where they were up here, it left a call to the method. So that's really handy. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could do that back here on graphics 2. I'm not going to bother on graphics 2. Okay. But I'm going to add a couple lines to set container. This dot set resizable else. Location relative to, come on. And I'm going to say relative to null. And I'm going to show you what those 2 extra lines do to this. And actually, I'm going to move this line up, the setting of the size. I'm going to do first. So I'm going to put it at a certain size and then do these other lines. And you'll easily see what these lines do. They're pretty simple. So for graphics 1, setting location to null means put it center in the screen. Set resizable false. You can see I can no longer maximize it, and I can't go to the edge and resize it. Meanwhile, back here in graphics 2, I could do that. I could resize graphics 2 if I wanted to. Okay, etc. So setting the size puts the size of the frame or the container at that, setting it resizable to false, setting it to the center of the screen, putting a title on it, and then making it visible. Whereas with graphics 2, I did a little bit simpler. I just said the title will be graphics 2 and it'll be visible. And actually with this one, I'm going to get rid of that line because the idea with using the designer is I don't want to write the code. I want to use the power of the designer, including, like in Visual Studio, a properties window. And sure enough, there's a property called title right here. Oh, so if I take that property and type in graphics 2, that would be probably the same as writing that line of code. Yes, that's the idea. So like was done last year in Visual Studio, NetBeans provides you a visual option for building graphics. So here you can see graphics 2, I didn't have to write a line of code to do that. Whereas with graphics 1, I wrote all the code to do that. And the idea now is at this level of your programming, you can create either or options. If you want to use a designer, use a designer. If you want to use just code, use just code. If you want to mix it up, so you maybe start with the designer and then do some coding, it gives you all those options, okay? When you use a designer, it will automatically put a version of main into that visual designer. However, you will notice you can erase it, which I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of main there, okay? Because I already have a main back here. It already creates something called Learn Graphics right here, which automatically creates a graphics 2 right here. So I don't need main inside of graphics 2, okay? It would confuse the program which main to go to. All right, back to our coded one. The next thing we're going to do with our all coded version of this is we're going to put some things into our graphics 1 container. In other words, we're going to create some things. So one of the things we're going to create is called a J label, and I'm just going to call it where text goes. So J labels will have to be imported. Now that we're using graphics, this section up here where we import stuff will keep getting bigger and bigger. Now, if I was doing this in the visual version, I wouldn't have to import it that way. The way I would do it is I would take a label over here and drag it and drop it over here. And you will see it will write the code for you to essentially do what we just did. Right there you can see it did the same thing. It created a J label. It just called it J label 1, whereas back here we made a J label and we called it text. But it's the same thing. All right, let's make a second one. A second J label. We'll call a picture. J labels can be used for both text and images. They don't have a picture box like in Visual Studio. Then we're going to create something called a JText field. This is the equivalent of a text box, so I'm going to call it text box. And I would have to import that because that's a brand new thing. I don't want to create it. I'm going to import one that somebody else made for me. And then finally a JButton, which I'm just going to call a button. Okay? So, and yes, it would have to be imported. And it's going to put in a few little extra spaces so it's easier for you guys to read this. There we go. So I will have 4 things inside my form. 2 labels, a text box, and a button. And I'm going to do it from the designer as well. It's much easier on the designer. So I have 1 label, second label, text field. There's also text area that's a little different. And a button, or what's called a J button. So there, I just dragged and dropped them right on here. And just like I coded it, it did the coding for me. Okay, so obviously there are benefits to using the designer. Speed would be the first benefit. Okay, all right, so text box, picture, button, button. Let's just see kind of where we're at here. Okay, all right. It's still recording, right? Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to create another method. I'm going to set my controls. I'm going to use the word controls, but it doesn't have to be that. That happens to be what NetBeans uses right here. Notice it says the word controls, just like it said up here, the word containers. So I'm just trying to match the same terminology there. But I could say set objects, set graphics, whatever. But I'm going to set up the controls, create a method for that. So the method will be taken care of down here, where I'll set up these 4 controls to look the way I want them to look. Okay. Then, finally, I will set up some actions specifically for the controls. So like I have a button, I want to make it so that when you click on the button, something happens. So I'm going to create a method called setting up the actions. And I'll get to that down here in a minute. But that's how graphics 1 will go, okay? It will set up the container, set up the controls, and set up the actions. But I'm going to move one line. The line of making it visible is kind of the last thing you want to do. So I'm going to actually move that line up here. So setting up the container will just involve the size, the title, the resizable, the location, and I'm going to add one more line to that. This dot set default close operation dispose on close. And I didn't have to write any of this code. This is an automatic thing. This is automatic for you. Again, if you put it in all caps, you know it's a constant. You didn't create this constant. That's okay. It's created for you because of the import of this stuff here, including the Jframe through inheritance. What this means is if I try to close graphics 1, it doesn't close the whole program. It just closes graphics 1. In other words, graphics 2 will stay running. So here's graphics 2 up and running. Notice it has those things already on there. Graphics 1, when I close it, graphics 2 keeps on running. Whereas graphics 2 is a little different. It has a different, what's called close operation. And you can find that in the properties window right here. When graphics 2 is closed, it exits the entire program. And you can also see there are other options there. So like the one we just said, you could do nothing, so it'll never close. You could dispose of it. You could hide it. So those are the options. And I said, you know what, let's dispose of it. Okay. All right. Now we're going to set up the controls. So in other words, these things here are going to be set to a certain way. Okay. So the first thing we have to do is instantiate them. Text equals a new, in other words, you have to call their constructors. A new JLabel is how I build this. And you will see when you build the JLabel, there are multiple constructors. It has been overloaded. So I could construct it just by default. I could construct it with words inside, right? I could construct it with a picture inside or an icon or both. So I could put words and an icon inside of it. So what I'm going to do is just use the default constructor. There's my text. Okay. Here's my picture is a new JLabel. Okay, so I'm just building the text, building this thing here. I'm building this thing here. Okay. The text box equals a new J text area, text fields. It also has constructors, okay? Very similar types of constructors. Actually, instead of the default, I'm going to put the number 20 in there. And what that means is, oh, why are you putting an integer in there? Why in the world would you build a text field and put an integer in there, just like it says right here. Why would you use this constructor? So now again, the benefit of good documentation. I can read right here in the Java documentation what that parameter I or that number means. Oh, the number of columns to calculate a width. So that way I can start my text box off a little bit wider instead of not wide at all. So I'm just gonna put 20 in there. Okay, my button will be a new J button. And just like the other ones, I can use one of the constructors, including this neat one that has actions kind of put into it. But I'm going to use the one that just puts text in it. So I'm going to make this button just a exit button. So I'm going to put the word exit inside of that button. Okay. Now, how could I do that from the designer side? How could I select a button and change the text? Oh, it's much easier here. Just find the property called text and put in the word exit. Boom. How do I make this text field? And I'm going to get the text out of this one, remove all the text from that text field. But how would I make it wider here? Oh, I would just stretch it out like that. So it's a little bit easier here to resize things and to move things because of the designer. But here I'm just writing the code to do this. Okay. So into the text, I'm now going to set the text to be the words hello world. So now I'm using a built-in method setting the text for the J label, which I have imported, called text. On the design side, I can go to graphics 2, select that J label, select text, type in hello world. And it just happens right there. It just works. Okay. So big benefits to using the designer in this way, or whoops, I could certainly use code here. Now, if you run this though, you're not going to see these changes yet. There's a little more work to do when you code it all yourself. As you can see, nothing's showing up on graphics 1 yet, but graphics 2, the work is done. It's saying hello world. It has an exit button with the word exit on it. It has a text box. Everything's done for me. So yeah, there are benefits to using designers, absolutely. But I wanted to show you both ways. Okay, now to do a picture. To do a picture, we got to get a picture. So I'm going to go online and get a quick image. And to make it a little more interesting, I'm going to make it an animated image. Let's see, what's this weird tomato thing? Oh, actually, I'm going to use the same one I used. This, I'll just use this guy. This is a pretty good one right here. So I'm going to save that image. I'm just going to put it on the desktop for now. Source.gif sounds good. Okay. All right. So let's do it first from the easy way. I'm going to take this J label right here. It's supposed to be an image. So the text for this J label, I'm going to put nothing in there. I'm going to take the text out. So it has no text in it at all. But just above text, I can see this thing that says icon. And right now it says there's none. But beside none is a little ellipse, a little three-dot button. When I click that, I can now import this picture into my project, which I'm going to do. Import to project from my desktop, source.gif. You might remember this is very similar to the way it works in Visual Studio. It then says, okay, where do you want to put it? So I'm just going to put it right in the package with Computer Science 30S. What that means is it's going to put it in here alongside your Java files. There it is right there. And there's the image. It's in my project now. Now, it will not resize it. And it actually cannot resize it in the same way that we resize stuff in Visual Studio. It's not quite as easy to do it in NetBeans the same way. But I can just sort of pop it in there. I'm going to put my text box here and my button down here. Okay, so there's my image right there in graphics 2. And if I was to try this, if I was to run this, there it is, right in graphics 2, and it's even animated, which is really cool. Now I'm going to try to write code to do the same thing over here in graphics 1. I'm going to try. But obviously, in order for this to work, I'm going to need to make my form a little bigger than the 500 by 400. So I'm just going to take a guess. Sneaky little nippy. Down to the bottom corner with your mouse. Pops up 2 little numbers. These aren't quite right, but they're pretty close. So I'm going to go with 550 by 800. Go back to graphics 1, go here to 550, and here to 800 instead of 400. I think that'll be better for the size I can fit this in. Okay, now to do the picture, I need to know where to get it. I need to know where to get this file and what it's called. So I'm going to make a final string for my file. Well, I know it's called source.gif. I can see that from right here. That's what it's called. I could also right-click on it, go to Properties, and it would tell me it's source and it's a GIF. It would also tell me where it is, the folder where it is. That can be handy, really handy, actually. So I could actually take that long thing right there, and I think I can copy it. I might be wrong. NetBeans might have disabled that, but oops, graphics 1. And yeah, that will work. I can actually paste in that big long path to the file. So that's how you get to that source.gif file. I'm actually going to break this into 2 lines because I'm running out of space here. Make it 3 lines. There we go. So there is the file. Now I say picture.setIcon to be a new image icon, and inside of there I put the file. So it's a kind of a 2-part process there with an import. To set the icon inside the J label, I have to make what's called an image icon, which I'm just making temporarily right here. Didn't have to do it this way. I could have done it a different way. I could have said icon equals new image icon, put the file in right there, and could have imported that, obviously. Then I could have put that icon right there. Okay? So here I'm doing it in 1, 2, 3 steps. So what I did is I just saved a step. I put this here instead of doing it that way. In theory, I could have saved another step by putting all of this in place of that. And that would also then eliminate the need to do that right there. That also works, but it's a lot of lines of code all at once there. So I'm kind of breaking it up a little bit. There we go. Okay. Now again, you still won't see this if it works, because now we have to do some work with what's called a container object. So container equals new container would be a way to go, but actually it's not quite what we're going to do. Container will have to be imported. The way we do container is we connect it to the frame itself. So we say this dot get content pane, weird name, but you'll notice it gives us or returns to us a container object. Now I know this is where things are already getting really complicated, right? So the thing about graphics is a lot of this code just gets mimicked, right? You don't have to necessarily fully understand everything that's going on in every line of code here. And that's one of the reasons why you don't have to worry about it when you use a designer. The designer hides the fact that a lot of this code is taking place for you. That you can see here, it's building those 4 things by saying they are. It's setting titles, it's setting text, it's setting icons for you. It's doing a lot of the work for you, and it usually hides that code away for you. So all you have to do is use something as nice as a properties window to make these changes. But for a lot of you, you want to get to this next level. You want to kind of understand kind of what's going on here as you build the graphics, what's going on behind the scenes. So I create a container object connected to this, which is the Jframe. Then I set what's called the layout of this thing, where things go. And I'm going to set it to a layout called null, which essentially means I'm not going to tell you where everything goes. Then to the container, I'm going to add my various things. So I'll add the text. So that's the label. And I've got 4 things to add. I'm going to add the picture. I'm going to add the text box. And I'm going to add the button. Okay. There we go. And now, when I run this, we still won't quite see it the right way. Graphics 1 is now bigger. It's big like Graphics 2. But it still doesn't show the same things on it that Graphics 2 does. So how do I do that next? Well, once you set the layout to null, you have to position everything. If I set the layout to what, and you'll see this in the notes, something like a new flow layout, then I don't have to. It will automatically position these things for me. You'll see that in a second. So now Graphics 1 has the stuff on it. See, it's got the label, it's got the picture, it's got all that stuff on there, just like mine, because a flow layout takes care of it for you. But it doesn't give you full control. Like maybe I don't want the exit button right beside the text box. Maybe I want it down here like it shows here. But it does at least work for you. So when I switch to null, now I have to position things. I have to say that the text, I'm going to set its location, or location is one way to do it, which gives you an X and a Y. But instead of location, I'm going to use one that's a little more powerful, called set the bounds, which uses X and Y, but also width and height. So I can really set exactly where it goes. However, I need those 4 numbers. If I just say 10, 10, 10, 10, and then when I did picture, text box, the button, if I did them all at the same width, height, X, and Y, they're all going to be all over top of one another. They're all going to be the exact same size in the exact same spot, all piled up on top of each other like that. So that's not going to work, okay? So if I changed them, right? So I want this one at spot 20, 20. This one at spot 30, 30. And at spot 40, 40. What if I made them all a little bit bigger? What if instead of 10, I made them all 50 by 50? That's a lot of guessing and checking and typing in lots of different numbers. It will eventually work. You will eventually get everything in the positions you want. But man, that takes forever to do that. So now, yeah, they're starting to not be piled up in necessarily the same way, but it's still a lot of work to get them to those spots. So here again is the benefit of something like that designer. It does it for you, but I can also use the designer to steal the numbers, believe it or not. So I'm going to just cheat a little bit. I'm going to set this to also a null layout, which means I'm going to need to set the size now. So I'm going to add this line. X2. I know it wasn't there before. But now it is. And now, for example, when I get to the label that says hello world, there are the numbers. I can steal them. So for my label, the text label that says hello world, there are those numbers. When I get to the picture, which it's called JLabel2, I can steal those numbers. And I can put them in here. So I wouldn't recommend this, obviously. I would recommend if you're going to do something highly graphically intense, then the designer is really a much faster way to get it done. There we go. And please watch the videos of me teaching this at a slower pace in the past if you're really interested in these graphics type options here. Okay. You absolutely do not need them for any kind of final project or final assessment for this course. We'll talk about that next week. But anyways, I've stolen all those numbers, and now when I run it, what I should see is the same numbers are being used to position it the same way in Graphics 1 as it is in Graphics 2. They're essentially very close to one another now. They're very much looking the same way. Graphics 2 and Graphics 1 look almost identical. I got to make Graphics 2 and 1 both a little bit taller. They're not quite tall enough. So the width is okay, but the height I'm going to make 830 on both of these. And let's try that again. Now that I have some stuff that I'm drawing in there, it's probably better to make them a little bit taller. There we go. Okay. So Graphics 2 and Graphics 1 look pretty much the same because I've told it to lay it out in the same way. Okay. Graphics 2, I didn't have to do any coding for. I just drew it on there. Graphics 1, I did all the coding for. Okay. So that's done. Okay. The set layout method sets the controls to all their spots. That's what it did. So just like set container worked to put everything for the form in place, set controls put all the controls in their place. The final thing I want to talk about today is actions. So let's do it the easy way first. I'm going to go to Graphics 2, I'm going to go to the design, and we're going to pick the easiest one, the button. So the easiest thing you do with a button is you click on that button, right? That makes sense, right? So just like Visual Studio, all you have to do is double click it, and right away it says put your code right here. Notice these lines that are in this sort of gray shade, I can't change it. Nothing I do changes it. But this part where there's a little comment, I can put system.exit 0, a line of code we learned back in Unit 1, which shuts everything down. It's kind of like application.exit in Visual Studio. So now, when I click on button 1 on Graphics 2, it should jump to the code to exit, which it did. That was really easy to do, okay? It was really easy to get that done when I use this designer. The designer makes life easier. You can see here, I've written 1, 2, 3 lines of code. That's all I've done in Graphics 2. Everything else I did with the palette of controls and the properties window. Back here in Graphics 1, I got more work to do. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make something called an action listener. Do I create this object? No, it is imported for me, or I import it myself. I import the action listener. Let me get rid of a few of these other. Okay. And I'm going to call it button listener equals a new action listener. My goodness. Sorry, guys. I'm just jumping all over the place here. Let's try that again. Action listener. And believe it or not, it ends up dumping a whole bunch of code on the screen for you. It essentially makes an action listener and it builds a little method right into it. Inside that method, I'm going to put the exact same line of code. System.exit 0. So that is some weird code to create a listener for the button, but I'm still not done. I then need to take my button, which is the J label, dot, I'm going to add an action listener to it, which is the button listener I just created. So I had to do all of this code to essentially do the same thing. Now I'm going to run it, And now I'm going to click on the button on graphics 1, which I just programmed, to exit. And it works as well. So all of this code is needed to do the same thing in this one that just required me just typing that in, because it does the work for me. If you look inside the generated code, you would see it is essentially doing the exact same thing that I just did. It wrote a lot of that code for me. That's handy, because it understands that some of that code is kind of a pain to write. Okay. Now let's do a different action listener. Let's go to graphics 2, go to the design. The button was the easy one. Now let's go down to the text box. Now we don't click on text boxes and expect an action, but what we do with text boxes is we type in them. So what I'm going to do, instead of double clicking it, I'm going to right click on it and go up here to where it says events. Notice this has got a little flyout window here. So right click, events, and then key. Okay. What I'm doing here is I'm right clicking, going to events, key, and then I'm going to go to key press. There are key release and key type. If you're making a game, something can happen when a key is being pressed. Something different happens when a key is being released. But I'm going to go to key pressed. Right click, events, key pressed. And once again, it just takes me to just some code right here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say text, another JLabel, dot set text, words, okay. Now, in this thing, it's not called text. Our original JLabel is just called JLabel 1, okay. So it's just JLabel 1 that this is going to happen for. So let's see what happens with graphics 2 when I type in the text box. So here's graphics 2. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type the W. And up here you see it says key pressed. It's a little too small though. I gotta just go back to one quick design thing here. I'm going to make this a lot wider so it can see. Let's try that again. It's running out of space up there. Oops. W. There we go. It says key pressed, whereas this one still says hello world. Let's add a little bit more to that. Key pressed space plus. Because they've given us a nice parameter right here. I can use it. I can say EVT, which apparently is the key event, dot. And what I'm going to pull out of the key event is I'm going to get the key code, which is some sort of number. So it'll know which key was pressed. Let's try that. So I'm going to go QWERTY. Here it comes Q, 81, W, 87, E, R, T, Y. Hopefully you were watching and seeing that each time I typed a different letter, it put a different number up there. All right, well, that was pretty cool. How would I code that back here? Well, it would be a similar way. I would say text box dot add a key listener. So I'm going to do it in one step. A new, okay, key listener. Let it put a whole bunch of code on the screen for me, which is weird, but there it all is. Some of this code can be shortened. I don't need necessarily all these extra spaces. But this code, when I press a key, I'm going to say, hey, what do we call it? Hey, text. That text to be the words key pressed. Us, in this case, it's called E, not EVT. E dot get key code. So what I'm doing now is the same thing will now happen in graphics, graphics 1. So now as I type keys, same thing is happening up here. Now I realize now I made that one wider, I should make this one wider as well. So I'm going to go back and steal the now size of that other one. So it's now 500 by 16. So here, I set the controls over this one. It'll be 500. Okay, and now it should work. And then finally, I'm going to do one with the mouse. So back here on Graphics 2 Design, I'm going to take my picture, right-click, Events, Mouse, and I'm actually going to go to Mouse Motion, Mouse Moved. So the event of moving the mouse over this picture will trigger an event to happen. So right-click, Events, Mouse Motion, Mouse Moved. And again, it takes care of all the work for me. Just like up here, it did the add key listener for me. Here, it's now going to do all the mouse stuff for me automatically right up here. So it's taking care of that code for me. Anyways, let's put in some code. I'm going to call a little method called mouse moved, and I'm going to pass it EVT, the events. And I just need to put a semicolon on that. And I'm going to create this method, mouse moved. And okay, here's the way I'm going to write it. I'm going to change the name of this to event. It's my own method now. Even though I'm using the designer, that doesn't mean I can't add my own methods, which I just did. And I'm going to say text.setText. Mouse event.get, and I'm going to get its x coordinate on the screen plus comma event.get the y coordinate on the screen. So as it moves over there, and it's not text, sorry, it's JLabel1 right here. It's going to do this. It's going to put those words in there for Graphics 2. Now, before I run this, I'm going to do it with Graphics 1 as well. With Graphics 1, I have to do it all myself. I have to say picture.add mouse motion listener, a new mouse motion listener. Puts a ton of code on the screen. Okay. When the mouse moves, I'm going to call a method. I'm going to steal the method from here. So I'm just going to take this whole method and bring it over to Graphics 1, drop in my own private little method, change this to just the word text, and I'm going to call mouse. All right, I'm going to call this mouse move, not mouse moved. I can feel like there's a conflict there. Back to this one and just take the D off the end of that. There we go. So they're different. So there's Graphics 1 and Graphics 2, both trying to do the same thing. Both trying to do what's necessary. Let's see if it works. So as I move over this picture, you notice up top there, it's changing the coordinates. And as I move over this picture, it's changing the coordinates. So both Graphics 2 and Graphics 1 are both doing the same thing. Okay. One is coded, one uses the designer. You can see here when I use the designer, actually, let me hide that code. The actual amount of code I write, one line, one line, one line, one line, one line, which calls my own method. So very little work there. All right, everybody, I'm going to call it for today. I can see my son needs my attention. So that's it. If you want to learn a little more about graphics, there's an even larger example, a sort of a much more graphical one in the formal videos. Like if you go back, let me share my screen again for 2 seconds here. If you go to the graphics videos that are here or the presentation, you can see much more detail of a fancier version of this. Let me just jump to, say, one of the last videos in this. Okay, so this will give you a much better way to look at this stuff. So I'm going to go to part 8 of this. Jump to about middle of this thing.
We're going to select Jframe Form and click Next.
And jump further ahead even.
So if I go to Icon and scroll bar.
So, yeah. So
okay, so now you have a ton of different graphics options here for doing a GUI design.
And yeah, there's
not that exciting.
There it is. That's the one I was thinking of.
Say equals new integer. We can.
You can see here I put a lot more code into this one on this video, but when it's done,
log. What that one is.
Anyways, it does a lot more to build something even bigger. You can also go into the GitHub. I will update the GitHub example with a lot more content from this as well. So all of that will be available for you if you're looking at graphics. None of that is necessary for this course. It is all extras. It is all really cool. Something fun to play with over the summer is making cool graphics and coding. Next week, I'm going to nail down the specifics of how to finish up this course. It's done. There's nothing more to do. You're engaging in your learning, but I'll just sort of talk a little bit about that next week. This week was all about graphics. All right, everybody, email me if you have any problems, issues, or concerns, and I'll see you all next week.